what does this whole system reform look like in practice? I've got the elements, the do's and the don'ts, and some of the notion of it. So I do want to use the Ontario case to tease some of this out and then give you the short conclusions. We sometimes call this, in our motion leadership work, the skinny of change. What's the essence, the smallest number of things you have to know? Another word we use is simplexity, a really good word. Not a real word, of course, but simplexity means you can identify the 6 or 7 or so key things that have to be there so they're not that hard to identify and remember. The complex part of simplexity is how do you put them into practice with a real group with many levels. The chemistry of system work is really where the sophistication comes. So that's the way we are thinking about how this develops. So we go to the Ontario case itself, just a few demographics. You can see it there, 13 million people, 5,000 schools almost. The one main thing you need to know about Canada is there is no federal Department of Education. That this means we don't get federal money, but we don't get any federal grief as we're on our own. So that seems like a fair deal. But think of Ontario as a country, but you could also do the state-by-state comparison. Ontario is like a state as well. So we have these this kind of profile, so it's a fairly large system. When we started in 2004, early 2004, Ontario was a stagnant system. That is, if you looked at any of the measures of success, you see flat line for the previous 6 or 7 years. So when the Premier got elected, when Dalton McGuinty first became Premier, he invited me, because I'd worked with him leading up to the election. He wanted to be an education Premier. He said, would you advise me once I'm elected? I have that role. I've been playing it for 9 years. And we've had really good progress because it's a lot to get this amount of buy-in from 130,000 teachers and principals, for example. That's a lot. But now we have a pretty strong case of it. And and it's helped because the realized part has been a further stimulus. So if you take, for example, the question of realization, if I go back to that, I said, when you're getting somewhere, it's the very experience of getting somewhere that motivates you to do more. Not just because it's working, but because you know how to make it work. You have the skills and capacity. So it's skills and capacity plus motivation that team up at that stage to get going. So I want to take a look at Ontario again and see what we've done, what we've accomplished. You see it on the screen. Literacy and numeracy, I'm going to say deeply defined, are measures by our independent agency, which is called EQAO. The big gains, these are, remember, they include some of the higher order skills, so it's not just mere literacy. But mere literacy, it's probably 97% success, but big move across 4,000 schools. High school graduation, great success, as you can see, and still moving upwards. Fragmentation versus cohesion, I'm going to come back to the term cohesion, which is a very interesting way of looking at coherence versus alignment, for example. But the point, a lot of sub-measures in here, we've not closed the gap, but we've reduced the gap in special education performance. We've reduced the gap in English language learners, for example, and we've reduced the gap in the number of low-scoring schools and poverty situations. So it's really been significant. If you ask yourself the question, what was at work here, this is, I wanted to get into the coherence making and ask you to remember one thing. Quite often we talk about alignment, and here's my punchline. Alignment is about structure, and structures are important. They can get in the way, they can help. But a much more important part of putting things together is not the structural alignment, but the coherence that occurs in your mind, what I've called mindsets. More than that, system coherence is when you increase the extent of shared mindsets, which we've done. That is, if you go into Ontario schools and you talk to teacher leaders or school principals, or you go to a district, or you go to the Ministry of Education and ask them to describe the Ontario strategy and progress, you have shared mindsets articulating that. Another warning, because there are a lot of good tools around now, teacher appraisal tools. We have one called School Effectiveness Framework that you can download from the Ontario Ministry of Education. website. And these tools are, when they're good quality, can be very helpful. But the trap is they're not going to be good on their own unless you're a thinking person using the ideas and concepts I'm sharing with you today. A tool is only as good as the mindset using it. Some elements of coherence, you'll see our list in a few moments in Ontario. Small number of ambitious goals. Other goals, but some that are elevated. Literacy, numeracy, high school graduation. A very important part, focus on instruction and student achievement agenda. Engage in continuous capacity building in relation to that focus. Cultivating systemness on the part of all. Tricky concept, but a systemness is when people in a system really do identify with an entity bigger than themselves. So a teacher, for example, in a collaborative school starts to think about not just my kids in my class, but all the kids in the school. A school principal working in a collaborative district is just as concerned about the success of other schools as he or she is about their own school, and they interact laterally to develop that, and so on. That sense of fostering that yet you're part of a system, that you are the system and the system is you, and that's a very important part of what this how this success comes about eventually. So those are some of the elements. Strategies for coherence. We're trying to, I use the word finesse, which really means how do you integrate top-down and bottom-up strategy. Your third bullet there, it says changing the culture of the district, not just the school. So schools can have a degree of autonomy, but they really have to be part of a peer interaction. And the change of culture means this. Yes, it's a different relationship between the schools and the district, but also it's a different relationship across schools, that peer culture again. Learn from implementation during implementation. This is within your school, cross schools, cross districts. We've had really district level exchanges around that. Handling distractors, one of our superintendents calls it activity trap. You can get attracted to the next thing that comes along. It might be good in its own right, but it doesn't fit or it takes you away from the energy. I mentioned earlier this question of exploiting public policy. Don't think you're on the receiving end all the time, even though in some days it feels that way. Be more proactive. Own the agenda. And then finally on coherence, if I think of the impact of coherence, that is, what do you get out of it if you have a lot of it? You get a lot more focus. You get a lot more consistency across schools and across districts. You get more sustained attention to improving practice linked to results. You get a whole bunch of multiple reinforcing strategies and energies to get results, as we've seen in Ontario. You get the better performance. And then lastly, I want to say this a little bit. Talk the walk and walk the talk. If we take the talk the walk, which is really an interesting way of thinking about this, what we found as a measure or indicator of success is when scores of teachers, scores of principals, wherever you go in the system, if you ask them, what's the strategy that you're using? I mentioned before, you get a lot of consistency, but you'll also get a lot of specificity, a lot of clarity. They can explain what they're doing and why they're doing it and what they're worried about. They talk the walk because they're deeply doing it. And when you talk the walk, you're clear for yourself. When you talk the walk, you can be more helpful for other people that you're interacting with. And this is very important. So what comes out of this is a lot of, I've come to call it mutual allegiance. People are committed to entities bigger themselves, committed to each other, and a lot of collaborative competition, interestingly enough, where people really get committed to, I can do better than I did last year. I can do better than you. It's kind of friendly competition, or I might call it moral Olympics. There's no ceiling on it. So that's the way of thinking about coherence. If I apply this specifically to whole system reform or all systems go, as you've seen the book, here's a checklist. I'm not going to dwell on it. These a small number of things that you can build in, and when you use it as a checklist, to what extent is this evident? To what extent are you able to develop it further? And that even further kind of cutting it down, I'm going to call this the stripped down version. High expectations and assertiveness from the center, whether that's the district leadership vis-a-vis the schools, principal vis-a-vis the school, State Department, other levels. that spirit of respect and fostering a sense of partnership in learning, obsession with implementation, spirit of good practice, and monitoring and corrections. If I think of the district level, let's make sure we nail this down a little better. Here's all of the whole concepts reform that I just stated apply within the district, and you have these cultural changes, this new relationship vertically as well. And I mentioned as well the mutual allegiance, which is a we sense of purpose, and collaborative competition. Thanks very much.